Good morning. Thank you for showing up this morning. Thank you for the honor of getting this opportunity to present to you. We've got a pretty full plate this morning. Get our presentation going here. There we go. Fire behavior and fire ground construction. Over the past decade or so, the fire research community has discovered some things that the old fires are a little bit different than the new fires in terms of timing, in terms of heat release rate, the amount of energy that they give off, in terms of the speed with which they generate that high heat release rate. And we found that they're a function of a lot of different things in the fire ground that impact you. Building construction has changed dramatically since the 1960s. The kinds of fuels that are put into our homes and to our offices have changed quite dramatically since the 1960s and continue to change every day. Alternative fuel sources, things like that. The research community has developed some improvements as well since that time. Our ability to go out into the field and measure temperature, heat flux, gas concentrations in real buildings, not just in laboratories, buildings where you operate, your work environment where you go to fight fires. We've also now have thermal imaging cameras. You have them to work with, the researchers have them to work with, where we can get a sense of the flow inside a fire when normally we couldn't see before, so we can understand where the heat is moving, things like that. Our ability to use computer models to predict fire movement and to understand fire movement and to use them in cases where there have been line of duty deaths to get a better understanding of what really occurred. All this comes down to the fact of maybe the tactics need to change. We have our outline today. Introduction, give you a little brief overview. We'll continue that. Talk briefly about fire behavior and structures. I'll introduce the Governor's Island experiments that were done with FDNY. And then Steve Kerber will get into the fire ground considerations, how you might consider changing tactics or adding tactics to your toolbox. And then we'll wrap up the research and hope that many of you can attend the workshops later today where we can go over this in more detail. Knowledge versus belief. Over time, the training books, training officers have sort of given the impression in many cases that ventilation equals cooling. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. In today's fuel-rich environment, it's turning out that in more cases, it doesn't. Actually, adding extra oxygen to complete the fire triangle makes the fire bigger, makes the hazard worse. There's a thought that exterior fire attack is only for defensive strategy. Well, currently, the way the books define it, you're defensive based on your position. If you're standing outside, it's defensive. If you're standing inside the burning structure, it's an offensive, offensive strategy. We believe that should be a different definition. It should be based on what direction are you moving in. If you're moving in, it's an offensive tactic. If you're withdrawing or moving out, then it's a defensive strategy. Basement fire attack should be from the top down. Well, you'll see today that when you think about it a little bit, you're putting yourself at the top of a chimney. And again, years ago, when most basements or cellars had very small windows, if they had any windows at all, that tactic would work very well. In modern structures, people like to have a lot of light. Walkout basements, emergency escape windows, things of that nature. Now, by putting a crew at the top of the stairs in a basement fire, if for some reason that glass should break, that could be the difference between them being alive or them being killed. You know, can you afford to take that chance? I know a number of training officers and fire chiefs to this day that have documents out that say an exterior fire attack will push fire. Never, ever do that. We hope that we'll show you some research results today to counter their opinion. Exterior fire attack will hurt victims. When we're running these experiments, we take measurements to look at the impact on the victims as well, to see, are we making it better just for the firefighters, or is this really helping the firefighters do their job even better? Is this good for the victims? And some of the thinking right now is sometimes you cut resources on an engine company to support truck or rescue operations because the thought is that venting the building and searching is the best way to aid the victims. Maybe not. And so these are the types of things that our research is addressing. Currently, you have the best gear that any firefighters have ever had in history. Unfortunately, and I should say fortunately, the total number of firefighters killed on the fire ground, in past years anyway, this has been a very tough year so far, has been going down. The bad news is, so has the number of fires. Firefighting is typically somewhat of an apprenticeship opportunity, right? You go through an academy, you get a very small amount of fire behavior training, maybe on the order of 3 hours, because the real learning is going to happen in the field, right? It's going to be the experience that you gain from a senior person in the firehouse and going to the fires. That's how you're really going to learn the craft. That's how you're really going to learn how you fight fire. Well, the number of fires are going down, so you're not getting that experience, right? So it's important to look at fire dynamics, to look at some of the research to try to fill in those blanks. Because what we see here in this disturbing trend is the number of firefighters that are dying in traumatic deaths on the fire ground per 100,000 fires is increasing. This is absolutely the wrong way to go. We want to increase your safety. What are some of the surprises? Well, I'm sure many of you recognize the graph that's under the traditional fire behavior curve. That's been in the training manuals for decades. You have ignition, you have growth, you have a fully developed fire, and then you have decay. Well, that's true for basically a fuel-controlled fire. If we have a fire that has enough oxygen to just sustain itself, it will go through that cycle very nicely. So if we have a pile of pallets in the burn building that's pretty leaky, has plenty of air, it's going to do just that. You put a pile of pallets out in a parking lot, it's going to do just that. If we have a small fire in this auditorium that doesn't spread very well, it's going to follow that same curve. But if we have a fire in someone's living room or their bedroom, the amount of energy that's going to be released is incredible. And in order to release that energy, it has to consume oxygen. And so these petroleum-based products that we have in our home, polyurethane foams, polyesters, nylons, things like that, is going to consume the oxygen and put that fire into a very early decay stage. Because our houses are very well insulated. We have dual pane windows, we wrap our houses in plastic, we have all sorts of insulation on them so that air can't leak in to keep the fire going. When the fire service arrives, in many cases, what they find is smoke. Unfortunately, in many line-of-duty death investigations that NIOSH conducts, when they talk to the survivors almost say when we got there, all we saw was smoke. They almost say it with a sigh of relief. You know, the fire wasn't so bad when we got there. And I believe that's because they think they're still in the growth stage. They don't realize they're already in the decay stage or the smoldering stage where you have gaseous fuel that's preheated and all it needs is more oxygen. They open the door, they break a window, and in 30 seconds to 2 minutes, there's a very rapid transition in heat release rate, a very rapid increase in temperature that now has the firefighters trapped or scrambling, especially if they don't have a hose line in place. So one of the considerations you need to look at is flow path. You do not want to be between where the fire is and where the fire wants to go. So what I'm showing you here is a flow path through a simple apartment configuration where the orange box is the fire room, the bedroom. It's 12 feet by 16 feet. We move down through a 12-foot hallway, and then we go into a 12-foot living room that's 12 feet by 16 feet. And then we enter out into a corridor. And the corridor, if you follow the red arrow, goes to a vent that's the same size as an open doorway, 36 inches by 80 inches. That's 24 feet away from the door to the apartment. If we go the other way, it's the non-flow side. So we're going to look at the impact of ventilating that window, the inlet, and see how that impacts the fire flow and the heat release rate and the conditions throughout that apartment. So the fuel loads that we use are real fuels. These are not training fires, these are research fires. So we're using the fuels that you encounter on a daily basis. We're using the fuels that you have in your home. We want to get a sense for how much energy, or in a sense, how much hazard in terms of heat is produced by each of these fuel loads. So the plastic trash container that we're going to use for ignition, you see is 30 kilowatts. A chair at its peak heat release rate there is about 1.8 megawatts. So if you imagine your favorite chair at home with flames 6 to 8 feet above it, That's about a 2 megawatt fire. We have next the sofa that we were using, 2.5 megawatts at the peak heat release rate, and then a king-size bed is about 4 megawatts heat release rate. I should mention at this point that the minimum amount of energy to flash over a typical residential scale room with an open door is 2 megawatts. So basically, one upholstered chair in a room that you're going to fight the fire in has enough potential energy to flash over that room. Now, how many houses do you go to that only have one upholstered chair in any given room? So we're going to look at this burn. Across the top, we see an outer view of our inlet vent. As we move over to the right, we're going to see the bedroom. We see our area of origin. You see the smoke plume going up and impinging on the ceiling. We next have a view in the corridor where we see our ceiling vent. And then we have a thermal imaging camera view that's looking across the open doorway from the apartment into the hallway. If you look at that thermal imaging camera view now, you'll just start to see a little bit of heat flowing out of the apartment doorway into the corridor. As we go across the bottom, we see the living room. It already has a smoke layer in it. We're 2.5 minutes after ignition. That smoke layer is building in the living room. And then the last two images on the bottom is a video image and a thermal imaging camera view of the target room. That doorway opens into the hallway. Right now, if you look at the thermal imaging camera view in the corridor, that should be typical firefighting conditions. Hot gases over your head, cool air that your gear is designed to work with below until that vent is made. And then you see we transition from a hot layer environment, cool environment in that hallway to heat floor to ceiling, moving at a very high rate of velocity. You'll notice that in the window we have pulsing in our inlet vent, we have bidirectional flow, hot gases going out the top, and fresh oxygen being entrained inside. And you see that we just failed the hollow core door in the target room a little before 6 minutes. So this is what it looks like from an engineering perspective in terms of heat release rate. The heat release rate is moving along, and then you see the vertical line where we vent the window. So the heat release rate's on the order of about 2 megawatts. Once that window was vented and additional oxygen was supplied to this hot, fuel-rich environment, you see that the heat release rate within 60 seconds goes up to 14 to 15 megawatts. Right? What's your hose stream choice for a 2 megawatt fire versus a 15 megawatt fire? If we look at the temperatures in the bedroom, clearly before the window was broken, the temperatures, basically the higher temperatures are near the ceiling. The lower temperature, the pink down there, is 1 foot above the floor. 1 foot above the floor, we're already at 500 degrees Fahrenheit. Clearly unsurvivable in that room of origin. Notice that when the window is vented, the temperatures increase, and they are pretty much similar floor to ceiling, indicating that we have burning from floor to ceiling, a well-mixed environment, post-flashover environment, which is in excess of 600 degrees C or 1100 degrees Fahrenheit, and that continues that way until we suppress the fire. What about in the living room? Well, the temperatures in the living room, 1 foot above the floor or even 3 feet above the floor, they're on the order of about 300 degrees and down. Is this an environment that a firefighter in fully protective clothing might be in trying to crawl down the hallway to get toward the fire? Possibly. You're coming in from a cold environment, your gear's going to protect you for a little while under those conditions until the window's broken. Notice how rapidly the temperatures, again, floor to ceiling, increase so that now they're in an area that's untenable for a fully protected firefighter to be working in excess of 700 degrees Fahrenheit. If you notice that little spike that happens right around 6 minutes, that spike is from when the door collapsed to the target room and the oxygen that was trapped in that target room flowed out into the hall and burned in the living room. Again, these fuels are very reactive to oxygen. And here's another important thing that people don't consider in many cases. It's a change in the heat transfer rate to the firefighter that's driven by the hot gas velocity. Before the window's broken, that red line shows that we have a velocity of about 8 miles an hour, 1 foot below the ceiling. And the other two lines at 4 feet below the ceiling or 4 feet above the floor and 1 foot above the floor, you see the velocity is very low. So that's the area where you would be crawling. Once the window's broken, you see that the velocity floor to ceiling increases. And as a result, the heat transfer rate, so not only is the temperature increasing at that location, but because it's a well-mixed hot gas that's moving over you with velocity, just like a hairdryer, if you turn a hairdryer and put it on high speed, it transfers more energy. Same kind of thing in this hallway. More energy would be transferred, reducing your time for a safe escape. The other thing to note is the amount of unburned hydrocarbons. So what are we talking about, unburned hydrocarbons? Well, typically, wood doesn't burn, right? The base material itself doesn't burn. It has to be heated and pyrolyzed, broken down into other fuels to burn. So if we pyrolyze wood, like in your flashover container, what kind of fuels are in there that are going to burn? Well, they're fuels like methane, recognizable fuels like acetylene that are in that hot gas layer, in addition to soot particles and many other components. So what you see here is that even with the window broken, even with all the energy that's being released, even with all that incredible amount of hazard that's there, we still have 12% unburned gaseous hydrocarbon in the hot gas layer in the living room, the red line. What that means is if you were to vent the living room again, open a window, more flame would come out. If you were to make a ceiling vent, more flame would come out, the fire would get bigger. If you can entrain more oxygen, the fire is going to get bigger because you still have an excess of fuel. So the idea that just because the fire is vented in one place does not mean it's safe to enter and that the heat is always going to go away from you. So what we found, the fuel loads have changed. Synthetic fuels have a tendency to burn faster and generate more unburned hydrocarbons. The building construction has changed. You have the lightweight construction. We have all sorts of insulation. And what we're finding in the research is that even the new dimensional lumber is not the same as the old growth lumber, if you will. And fire behavior is now better understood so that we can get a better feel to pass this information along to you and translate it into tactics. So this decades of research basically all came together last summer with the fire department in New York City on Governor's Island, where we had an opportunity to burn a number of townhouses. And the idea there was to see all these things that have been done at the lab at UL, in the labs at NIST, and in other acquired structures, could we bring them all together to have a fire department implement them and see how it would work? Sort of look at the current practice and compare it to the new practice. Looking at controlling ventilation and flow paths to reduce the occurrence of a ventilation-induced flashover. Examine the use of exterior fire attack to reduce firefighter exposures to high thermal conditions, and look at how all this would impact the tenability of any victims that were viable. So we have these row homes. Again, they were left in quite good conditions. So they were identical. We had a 4-bedroom unit, and if you look at the 4-bedroom unit on the right, there's 2 bedrooms upstairs. And one of those bedrooms we would keep the door closed, and one of the bedrooms we'd keep the door open. We'd start the fire downstairs, and we would see how the conditions would impact a victim, if you will, in each bedroom. Again, we're furnishing the houses with real fuels. The first floor, we have a living room area, we have a kitchen area, and an entrance to the basement. Again, real-world furnishings, carpeting, furniture, kitchen cabinets, things of that nature for our fuel loads. In the basement, we also did a number of tests in the basement to look at flows up the stairs, look at the best way to attack basement fires. So we had a living room area, and then we also had a bedroom area. And we erected a wall between the bedroom area and the living room area, and we started fires in both. And the idea there being is that if the firefighters introduced a hose stream through that 30-inch window that's right above the sofa in the upper left-hand corner, we knew that hose stream couldn't directly impact the bedroom fire that's in the rear of the basement. So how well would it work? Or conversely, if the firefighters came down the stairs in the rear and introduced a hose stream, how would it impact the basement as a whole? Again, you see that it was unfurnished wood floor assembly, so we had plenty of fuel just in the wood flooring assembly by itself. And there you see an example of some of the furniture, as well as the 30-inch window on the front side of the house and the entry doors, basement doors on the rear of the structure. So they were 2-story townhouses in each case with a full basement, approximately 850 square foot per floor, concrete block walls exterior, and the interior was all wood frame construction with a wood floor assembly. Our fuel load, Again, our fuel was real furniture, polyurethane foam, polyester, and as we looked at some of the tags, just like the tags on the furniture that you have in your house, it says that it's highly flammable. You know, keep cigarettes, keep ignition sources away from it. So we have wood, polyurethane, polyester, and fabric. And then the real key that we bring to the table here is having a tremendous amount of instrumentation. So we have instrumentation on the doorway, bidirectional probes. We have them on the windows so that we can tell when the hot gases are flowing out or in and what part of the doorway they're flowing in and what temperature they are. We have thermocouples throughout the structure to measure the gas temperature, to see what the temperatures are in the bedroom, what the temperatures are in the basement and the living room, all throughout the structure. So we have hundreds of data channels installed. We have thermocouple arrays and heat flux sensors basically located where a firefighter's head would be, about 3 feet above the floor at the top of the stairs and in various locations in the structure, to see what the impact would be on a firefighter that's moving in that area. We have gas analyzers where we're measuring oxygen concentration, CO and CO2 in the bedrooms to look at the viability and the impact that the tactics and the fire are having on any victims that might be trapped in the bedroom. We bring it all together, and last but not least, of course, is a series of videos. So with that, I'll turn it over to Steve Kerber, and he'll show you some of our results.
Thanks, Dan. So as you can see, with that amount of instrumentation, we're getting hundreds of hours of video from every different view in the structure. We're getting millions and millions of data points. So what do we do with all that? Well, we work with firefighters of all levels, of all different types of departments from across the country, many of which are your members. And we try and boil it down to, what does that mean to the street level firefighter? What does this mean to tactics? What can we learn here and how can we apply it? And so we're going to go through some of the common tactics that you might use on the fire ground. The first one is a vent, enter, isolate, search operation. Here, adding the I to VEIS, emphasizing the isolation of that room that you're entering to understand the importance of cutting it off from the flow path. And what you're looking at here is a fire in the first floor living room. And as Dan mentioned, we have one open bedroom and one closed bedroom on the second floor. We're going to have the tower ladder go ahead and take the open bedroom, and you'll see that you don't get much flow out of that open bedroom. They reposition over to the bedroom with the open door, so it's now in the flow path, and you're going to see a very different result. You're going to see hot gases flowing from a high pressure to a low pressure, which is that window that got vented. And the thing that we have here is we have a cable running through the firewall from unit to unit attached to the doorknob, and you're going to see that we're going to be able to pull the door to that room closed, simulating a fire crew isolating that room. And you're going to see how conditions change. So figure they're making entry at this point, they're getting to that door, and you're going to see, once that becomes isolated, the smoke in that room lifts, it becomes searchable, you gain visibility, and more importantly, you stop the impact of cool air in low, hot gases out high. So we can boil that down into this simple figure right here. We're looking at the change in flows and the change in temperatures throughout the structure. And you can see that as you have that flow path through the open bedroom, temperatures increase dramatically. You've got, once that window's taken, you've got temperatures in the floor of the bedroom increase from 170 to 250. You get a 15-mile-per-hour flow through that window. Ceiling temperatures increase from 350 to 650, creating an environment that is not survivable for very long. And now we look at the impact of closing the door. You see that the flow goes from, at the moment right before the door was closed to the moment right after the door is closed. You go from a 12-mile-an-hour flow to no flow. You've got ceiling temperatures that drop from 450 to 150, and temperatures at the floor that go from 170 to 120. So clearly, you're greatly improving the environment in that room simply by closing the door. Now we want to look at the impact of water through an open front door onto the living room fire. So you've got a living room fire with the front door open. Front door being the source of air is going to increase the size of the fire in the living room. And what we're trying to show here is the concept of not putting water on smoke is very dangerous these days. If you wait until you see fire, until you open up your hose line, in a situation like this, you're crawling under into the flow path, and you're putting yourself between where the fire is and where the fire wants to go. And here we're showing that you can gain the upper hand in that structure fire by starting your fire attack prior to moving through that front door using the reach of your hose stream. And especially the folks that use smoothbore or commonly use straight streams, when you've got a reach of 50 plus feet, you got to take advantage of that. And to be right on top of the fire to begin to affect the fire is not the best solution, because you may never see fire, but those hot gases over your head in excess of 1,000 degrees can go ahead and actually light up behind you because they're moving to where they're finding the source of air to burn. If it's too fuel rich in front of you, you may see nothing but black, and ultimately the folks outside would see it light up at the doorway because that's where the fire triangle is taking place. Here's what it looks like. So we're looking at just over 20 seconds of water, and applied as they moved up the steps into the structure. And you're looking at living room temperatures on the back of the house dropping from on the order of 600 down to 350, really controlling the environment. Bottom of the steps decreased from 1,800 degrees to 800 degrees with that small amount of water. Again, gaining the upper hand, taking the energy out of the fire to go ahead and move into that fire and completely suppress it. Another, as Dan mentioned, the importance of basement fires. Positioning yourself above where the fire is and the hazards associated with that. Here we're flowing 180 gallons a minute into the top of that stairway, protecting the stairs. We've got a basement fire below that, as you can see in the left view there, is well involved. And we're looking at what's going on and the ability to, let's say, protect the search that may be taking place above the basement fire. We go ahead and flow water for a period of time, and then we shut it down. And you're looking at those hot gases flow up those basement stairs. And we're going to go ahead and now look at the conditions that occur in that structure as we're protecting the stairs. So you can see nothing happens to the basement. So that water is not going down the basement stairs, making a turn, making another turn, and landing on what's actually burning. You're basically just trying to cool the gases as they come up the chimney, flowing from the high pressure in the basement to the low pressure, which is the open front door that you came in through. And you can see that the top of the stairs cool off from about 600 degrees to 400 degrees. So still very hot at the top of those stairs. You're only going to be able to take that for a period of time. Looking at the bedrooms on the second floor as you're trying to improve conditions for victims. It only decreases from 225 to 210 in the open bedroom. So you're not having a huge impact up there. And of course, the basement is continuing to burn. Another thing we saw here, which was concerning because we saw it multiple times, was the path of fire travel from the basement to the first floor in all of the experiments we did was never through the interior stairwell. Hot gases came up through the interior stairwell. However, the fire spread was through the pipe chases in the kitchen, into the kitchen cabinets, and it ultimately flashed over the kitchen and collapsed the kitchen floor. So if you can get tunnel vision and think that I need to put all my resources to protecting the top of those stairs, you can quickly get caught off guard as that fire is moving up in the structure and possibly even behind you through penetrations in the floor. That was really important in this case because the path from the front door to put yourself in a position to protect the stairs would place that kitchen and that collapse zone pretty much in your egress path as well as your path inward. So you can put yourself in a very dangerous position. Getting above a fire burning uncontrollably provides both the collapse hazard as well as the flow path hazard that you're putting yourself in the chimney, as Dan described earlier. So we can look at alternatives. If you show up to a structure like this where you've got fire showing from the A side, a well-involved basement, what we're looking at is the conditions on the front of the structure, the flow path established through the front door, and now we're going to go ahead and flow, in this case, a smooth bore flowing 180 gallons a minute into that basement window. And we're watching the thermal imaging view at the top of the stairs and looking for that push of heat that's thought to occur. And what we saw was that the knocking down of the source of the fire, taking the energy out of the fire, actually didn't allow for a huge burst of heat to come up through that basement stairway. So the thought of pushing the fire up from the basement to the first floor or further endangering crews in several scenarios of applying water in the window, applying water in the walkout on the back, we didn't see it. So here's what those temperatures look like. Remember previously when we were protecting the stairs, we cooled the top of the stairs from 600 to 400. In this case, they quickly cooled from 600 to 200. Taking the heat out of the basement, went from 1,200 degrees to 400 degrees in the basement. So you totally take away the source of the problem. And then you can see upstairs in the bedrooms, cooled from 225 to 190. Was more effective than the hose line flowing at the top of the stairs. And ultimately, you create a condition in the basement where if there was a collapse hazard, you're falling into, it's going to be a hot environment, but it's a hot, wet environment, and it's not a well-involved fire that you may potentially be falling into. Well, if it works in the basement, what about giving the fire a quick hit in the second floor window prior to moving in? Possibly being a seamless operation as you're walking up, you give it 10 seconds of water as you're moving in, and then you go in and finish it off. We're looking at the conditions that occur downstream. And one of the things you'll see here, which we found out, is if you rapidly move a smoothbore nozzle around, you can create a fog pattern. And if it's your intent to have the hot gases that are flowing out of that second floor to continue to flow out of that second floor, it's important that you slowly move that stream so you don't break it up and entrain a whole bunch of air. So even though this stream was applied not optimally, we still got fairly good results. So we're looking at taking a bedroom fire in excess of 1,000 degrees down to 200 degrees at the ceiling. And really where we were focused was in the hallway right outside that bedroom. Are we going to push a huge amount of heat that if there was a victim laying in that hallway that we would place them in further danger? And what we saw was the ceiling temperatures dropped from 900 to 200. And at the floor, if someone was laying on the floor, there was a modest increase of 100 degrees to 120 degrees. But if you look at taking the amount of energy that they'd be subjected to from that hot upper gas layer, clearly the benefit of cooling that off is tremendous. We also wanted to look at vertical ventilation. So we wanted to look at a fire on the first floor living room that you can see in the top right view there. Open front door, so the fire is moving towards the source of oxygen on the front door, and we're going to go ahead and open up a roughly 4x4 hole at the top of the stairwell. The thought being, you vertically ventilate, it lifts the smoke off the first floor, and it cools things down. And you can see that once that vent was opened, more air is able to be drawn through that front door, increasing the size of that living room fire, and actually flashing it over, pulling it towards the front of the structure, and making very bad conditions upstairs. Then we went ahead and we closed the front door to take away the air inlet, just allow the vent to be an outlet. And we'll show you what that did to conditions. But again, it's the traditional, if I can open up high, venting equals cooling and things are going to get a lot better. Well, the caveat there is if you have a ventilation-limited fire, not necessarily. Water gets applied from the front, and you can see that it actually knocks down the fire completely in the rear of the structure by taking the burning gases away. essentially transitioning it from a ventilation-limited fire to a fuel-limited fire. So here's what that looks like, looking at the impact of door control. So if we have that vertical vent made and we control the front door, limit the fresh air going in, the bottom of the stairs slightly increase because we took away that fresh source of air. However, the top of the stairs drops by hundreds of degrees. The living room went from 1,700 to 1,200, 1,300 to 750. So by choking that fire, slows it down, allows your vertical vent to work a little more, and ultimately, once the water goes on the fire and you gain the upper hand, which means you're letting more out than that fire can create, things get better very quickly. So it's all about timing. It's not that vertical ventilation always makes things worse, absolutely not. But if you time it and coordinate it with your suppression, it's going to make things better very quickly. Here's what happens when you apply that water. So you apply that water from the front door, 25 seconds of water, and you can see the living room temperatures plummet from 1,500 to 250, and ultimately the top of those stairs from 1,200 to 400 in 22 seconds. So you're allowing that vertical vent to do what you intended to do, not just allowing fresh air in. You take the heart of the fire away, and your vertical vent will work for you very well. Look at the open bedroom drop from 1,500 degrees to 100 degrees in 20 seconds when you allow that vent to do what it's meant to do. So we've thrown a lot at you. I want to wrap it up real quick and talk about the key points. And so all the experiments were consistent with what we've seen in previous research. At this point, we're in the hundreds of full-scale fires that we've seen the same themes over and over again with controlling the air and applying water. And increasing ventilation needs to be well-timed in order to work for you. Flow paths are very important. Understanding where you are in between where the fire is and where the fire wants to go, and understanding that you've got two levers you can pull. You can control the air, or you can apply water to make it safe to be in that area. Exterior fire attack. Starting your attack as you move in or prior to moving in, implementing an offensive strategy, moving in to finish the fire off. You can't just sit at a window and flow water and expect the problem to go away. You want to give it a quick shot, you want to gain the upper hand, you want to make it safe for your crew to move in, and you want to move in and you want to finish it off. And again, we saw this over and over and over again, and in a lot of places this isn't new, regardless of what you call it, whether it's transitional attack, blitz attack, quick water, softening the target, there's a million names for it. What we want you to understand is what's going on with the fire dynamics when that takes place. Use the reach of your stream, don't be directly underneath the problem. Impact on building occupants. We see this over and over again, that taking the heart of the problem away makes things better throughout the structure. And ultimately, we're looking at this to be implemented as your crews see fit, see how it impacts your standard operating procedures, add tools to the toolbox, make you think critically as to what you see on the fire ground and piece the whole thing together. It may not just be one point of view that's telling the whole story. And hopefully we interested you enough with the scratching of the surface here. Dan and I both have a website that you can visit to get a whole lot more information. But where we would love to see you is the workshop this afternoon, as well as the workshop Saturday morning. We can really get into it, answer a lot of questions, talk about your concerns, talk about success stories, and really be interactive the next couple days. Thanks a lot.